Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on continuous compliance. My name is Kishore Vaswani. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ControlCase, and I really appreciate the time you have taken today to attend this webinar on this exciting topic of continuous compliance in the context of various regulations, IT regulations that exist out there. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As we go through the webinar today, if you have any questions, please put them in the questions window, and we will answer them in the order that we receive them. Also, if you have any audio or visual difficulties in viewing the screen or hearing me, please feel free to put in the chat window or the questions window, and our moderators will be monitoring it to ensure that our audio and visual is going well. Our webinar today is expected to run about 25 minutes. A copy of these slides, as well as a recording of this webinar, will be distributed to everybody early next week. Also, you can go ahead and sign up for any future webinar by going through our website at www.controlcase.com. Or you can also view a recording from any of the past webinars that we have done on www.controlcase.com. That being said, we will now get into our webinar. And as I said, just please feel free to put questions in the questions window or any issues viewing or hearing me in the chat window, and we will ensure we are able to monitor and answer any questions towards the end and monitor any issues you have as we go through our webinar. Our agenda today is to talk a little bit about ControlCase. Then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which is various components of continuous compliance. The idea here is to provide you with specific and a checklist that you can use to build your own continuous compliance program if need be. We'll talk about common frequencies and calendars, and then we'll talk about some of the common challenges out there and how some of the ControlCase solutions address continuous compliance. So a little bit about ControlCase. We focus on IT certifications as well as continuous compliance services. That is our entire focus. And certainly, we follow a partnership approach with our customers and ensuring we are going beyond the checklist and providing great certification and continuous compliance services to our customers. The two areas where we differentiate and make sure we bring value to our customers is, number one, a partnership approach. So we ensure that beyond the checklist auditor, we are your partners in the certification process and always doing the right thing. And then number two, we ensure that we spend time and effort on automating things wherever we can make either our certification or our continuous compliance services more streamlined for our customers and use technology to do that. So partnership approach and focus on automation are key aspects of everything we do, including certification and continuous compliance services. And finally, here's just a list of some of the certifications and compliance services we focus on. We're certainly able to do many more besides this that are not listed in this webinar. So anyway, that was a high level of ControlCase and what is our offering. Now let's get into the meat of the presentation today, which is talking about continuous compliance. So when we talk about continuous compliance and continuous monitoring, what is absolutely important as we get into the details of what is required from a continuous monitoring perspective is that dashboards that give you a good sense of where you are in your overall compliance program are an essential component of any continuous monitoring program or continuous compliance program. So ensure that controls are mapped, ensure you're taking all your compliance requirements into account, making sure that you're automating wherever you can to get more real-time data, and having dashboards that provide that continuous monitoring look. We will get into this in much more details, but here is an exhaustive listing of what we'll be covering today in what we feel at ControlCase are important continuous compliance domains. And as I mentioned earlier, a big part of our presentation today is to ensure that you have a list that you can use as a starting point to ensure that you are providing continuous compliance services on an ongoing basis, and you can look up against that list on an ongoing basis. And so again, we're going to get into details and talk about each one of these, but here is a list of what we feel at ControlCase are important components of continuous compliance, or also what we call the continuous compliance domains. The first one we want to talk about is policy management. And most IT regulations, and we have given some samples here to give you a sense of how and where policy management ties to some of the common IT regulations that are out there in the industry, just as an illustrative example, but also as a checklist so you can use as you build your own programs. So policy management, making sure A, policies are documented, B, there's a method to follow the policies, C, everybody is aware of the policies, and they're updated on a frequent basis, and that they map to all your multiple regulations that exist out there, generally falls in the policy management space, and that's an important component of any continuous compliance and continuous monitoring program. In today's world, it is very common for companies to outsource various business functions. These functions could be data centers, these functions could be software development, call centers. It is common for companies to outsource various business functions to companies that specialize in a certain business function. So while you can outsource business process, all the IT compliance regulations out there do require you to manage the risk of outsourcing by yourself. So while you can outsource a business process, you still own and you cannot outsource the risk. And hence, the vendor or a third-party management program which looks at your vendors on an ongoing basis becomes an important component of that dashboard of continuous compliance that's required for organizations who are trying to build a continuous compliance program and are trying to do continuous monitoring, and hence monitoring of vendors and third parties is an important component of that. Next is asset and vulnerability management. In today's world, there is, companies routinely have hundreds and thousands of assets out there. They can go across various platforms. They can be between your traditional data center environment, in-house data center environment, cloud environment, or a hybrid thereof. And so ensuring that there is a good process to A, ensure that the asset inventory is updated and looked at on an ongoing basis, and B, any vulnerabilities that may show up for those assets is a closed loop process, and that it happens on a frequent and ongoing basis. So it is, identifying the asset list, updating the asset list, management of any vulnerabilities that show up on the asset list, ensuring you're tracking any non-compliance or not, from a vulnerability perspective, and this forms a key component of any continuous compliance program. Logging and monitoring. A lot of the companies, and many of you on the phone, obviously have well-established logging and monitoring solutions and programs and softwares. A big part of continuous compliance monitoring is to ensure that on a periodic basis, you are reviewing and making sure that the right assets are still reporting logs, that they're reporting logs in the right manner. There were no new assets put in that are not reporting logs. And then sometimes ensuring that you're also testing that the 24/7 monitoring component of your logging and monitoring is working as desired. And so logging and monitoring, obviously, as I said, many of you have software that do that, but it is important to make it a part of your continuous compliance program to ensure you're looking at these logs on an ongoing basis and ensuring that things line up properly, quarter after quarter when it comes to looking at the logs, making sure the right assets are reporting, and making sure that the right logs are reporting. Change management. Change management includes the process from A, identifying if there was a change, B, tying it back to whether it was an expected or an unexpected change. So as you can see, we have given a sample workflow here that works in the change management cycle, which is your change management cycle starts with really logging and monitoring and making sure you're detecting any anomalies that may show up through your logging solution or your other network monitoring solutions. When that happens, then you can tie it back to a valid change ticket, which means it was an expected change, or B, you cannot tie it back to your change management process, in which case it might be an indication of either a problem or an incident. But having this formality around change management is an important aspect that ties back to continuous compliance. I touched on this briefly. As we talk about change management, the right next step after that is incident and problem management. And the right way to think of it is, individual unexpected changes that didn't have a change ticket could be called an incident. And that's probably the right way to look at, one way to look at an incident. And we have given some examples here. When we talk about problems, those are more systemic issues that can be looked at over a period of time. So if you look at, a list of incidents over a quarter or over a month, and there's a lot of repetitions, that might be indication of a problem. And both incident management as well as problem management have a place in, in the ecosystem to ensure it's a part of your continuous compliance monitoring and your continuous compliance management processes. Again, as shown here, a lot of the regulations do mandate that be looked at. When we talk about compliance and regulations, there are many different vectors that can be looked at when it comes to compliance and and security. One of the aspects is confidentiality of data and protection of data. So ensuring that you are looking at your data management as a holistic continuous compliance process is extremely important. And that includes multiple aspects. It includes, number one, identification of data. Number two, classification of data, right? Sensitive, non-sensitive. Then number three, protection and monitoring of data, which is, if it's sensitive, does it need to be encrypted and those kinds of variables. Monitoring of data to ensure that, it's not showing up in unexpected places and in places where it is being shown up, logs and appropriate logs are there. So it goes across a variety of controls, but it all kind of falls back into the overarching concept of data management when it relates to continuous compliance. Then is risk management. Almost every IT regulation out there, and certainly these ones here at the bottom right you can see, require that an annual risk assessment be done. And an annual risk assessment really focuses on ensuring that when we are looking at the enterprise or certain business processes, somebody has gone through systematically, looked at the list of risks, and then ensured that once we have looked at the risks, there is analysis done on what is that risk vector, what is the probability, what is the impact, and are able to make and prioritize what should be looked at in the short run versus the long run based on all these factors, which is likelihood of the risk, probability of the risk, and so forth. So risk management is an important aspect of that. We talked about confidentiality of data. There are various regulations that also look at availability. And so business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning really focuses on that part of compliance, which is making sure that there are things like business continuity plan, making sure testing is happening on an ongoing basis from a business continuity disaster recovery perspective. And all the other different components, whether it is redundancy in databases, whether it's redundancy in hard disks, essentially all of this is a component of business continuity management. And from any compliance perspective where continuity is important, looking at these on an ongoing basis, testing these on an ongoing basis, and having a dashboard on that is an important aspect of business continuity. Next one is HR management. And this includes things like background checks, right? Training, security awareness training, making sure your developers are getting training on secure code practices, and making sure the background check and the reference check process is appropriate as you onboard new employees, and a method to ensure that the training records are appropriate. So all these different components have to be monitored so that it doesn't slip off on an ongoing basis. And a lot of these might be inputs for your dashboard you get from your HR department, but you certainly almost all regulations have a HR component to it. The next one is physical security, and this could include periodic physical security walkthroughs. It could, a lot of times companies outsource to various cloud environments, so they might rely on the cloud's providers' physical security reports and attestations, but ensuring that physical security is looked at on a scalable basis and looked at from a perspective of whether it's internal or a third party would be an important aspect of continuous compliance and needs to make its way to the dashboard. So before I move ahead to the next section, which is recurrence, frequency, and calendar, I will just reiterate, and provide you a view on, here's the list of things which we at ControlCase feel form a good list of things which should be a part of your continuous compliance programs. You will have a copy of these slides. So certainly, we encourage you to just take a look at this, look at your business processes, and make sure you've thought of all of this in that dashboard that you're looking from a continuous compliance perspective. All of you are from the compliance world, so none of this should be very new. What we feel this adds value is it gives you a list to compare and think about when it comes to continuous compliance and continuous compliance monitoring using the various tools and technologies that may exist there. Let's get to the next section over here, which is recurrence, frequency, and calendar. So just the word continuous compliance means that something is happening on an ongoing basis. Now, something happening on an ongoing basis does not really mean from a continuous compliance perspective, it has to happen every second and every minute, right? Of course, from a security perspective, you have to do a lot of things very, very frequently, but there are some things which could have other frequencies because there might be actions required which cannot happen every day. But we have just broadly classified, again, taken a wide swipe, and everybody of you will, it could be a little different, and what applies versus not might be a little different, and the frequencies might be different. But here's an example of a list of things which we think are really, as you talk about continuous compliance, could almost be daily monitoring domains. and we have seen the best-in-class companies really look at this, either daily or weekly, and make sure that things are happening very frequently and being monitored. And so asset management, log management, change management, and incident and problem management are things which we have seen that daily and weekly seems to be the right frequency. Then there are monthly and quarterly domains. Things like third-party management, right? There's a communication time involved with third parties. If there are gaps found, you have to trace those gaps back to kind of conclusion. So third-party management, data management, just because there's so much data out there, HR management, physical security management. These are things which, really generally we have seen best-in-class programs to have it on a quarterly basis, sometimes on a monthly basis, but quarterly is really a more kind of common time frame for some of these activities. And then there is annual programs. So even though it's continuous, there are things which typically we have seen best-in-class still do on an annual basis. Things like annual policy reviews, things like business continuity disaster recovery tests, especially the BCP-DR tests that involve the entire corporation, because it takes a lot of preparation and so forth. Risk management and the annual risk assessment report. These are what we call annual monitoring domains, because the best-in-class programs we have seen at ControlCase would probably be doing this once a year. But again, these were just examples of what we have seen best-in-class programs doing. There are many companies we have seen who do things way more frequently than this. There are some programs that do lesser frequency than this, but with equally good results. And so really the point here was that not everything has to be done every day and every week. Based on your actual environment, you can prioritize which aspects of continuous compliance are done with which frequency. And the key is whatever you decide, making it a good cadence is an important aspect of it. And so it is important that that the cadence be looked at on an ongoing basis. As we get to the last part of our presentation, we're going to talk about some of the common challenges. We're going to talk about the ControlCase solution, and then as you have been putting questions in the Q&A, we will move on and answer any questions you may have. Again, please feel free to put in any questions in context of continuous compliance, in context of any of the regulations that exist out there from an IT perspective, or any other questions from the domain are, fair game. The common challenges, we all know budgets reduce, you have to do more with less, dashboards are difficult to sometimes put together. A lot of times in large companies, there are redundant efforts, redundant tools that are used. We talked about third-party management and the amount of changes happening. And then finally, the number of IT certifications or regulations or compliance regime just seems to keep on increasing all the time. And so those are some of the common challenges that I'm sure a lot of you folks can relate to that you're seeing in your environment on an ongoing basis. And so we at ControlCase, certainly from a continuous compliance perspective, feel that it is important for us to be able to work on certain areas where we have seen companies have issues from an overall perspective. Things like, some of the things are more automated, some of the things are more manual. But, we at ControlCase feel there is about 20 to 25 data points, that, and, these are different per company because how it works for a company might be different. But there are 20 to 25 data points that need to be looked at on a quarterly basis, at least from a continuous compliance perspective. And these 20 to 25 data points could span across some technical questions and technical data points, and some what I call interview-based or more strategic data points, which obviously cannot be automated, but are more manual comparing your asset list to your vulnerability list to your log list, and ensuring any dispositions are found. And technology is absolutely important in those things because, it's difficult for a human to look through that kind of data and find that kind of issues. But those are certainly issues you want to find at the fine-grained level. There are other things: implementation of a new system, M&A activity, divestiture of businesses, acquisition of businesses, changes in payment processing methods. These are more higher level questions that are equally important to be looked at in the overall context of compliance. But obviously, there is no single push button method to automate those. And so continuous compliance really is a combination of both of these. Absolutely, it has to be, the 80-20 rule generally has to be applied, right? Nobody wants to be in perpetual audit all year long and call that continuous compliance. You want to make sure you're putting aside a week or two every quarter to do this, but it's a repeatable and a scalable process. And so certainly that's important. And finally, the deliverable is, what are issues that make you non-compliant or were they not, whether it's technical or a more higher level. Certainly that's something we provide services to our customers as well. As we end this presentation, certainly, we use technology for various aspects, and that's essentially what this slide is intended to talk about. At the end of the day, how do we differentiate ourselves? We follow a partnership approach with you as a customer. We are certainly investing a lot in technology, and then certainly we look at compliance as a continuous activity and not really a point in time, although both are equally important. That being said, I will now answer any questions. Hopefully you found this webinar useful. We will be sending out a copy of these slides. We'll be sending out this recording, and we will answer any questions that you guys put in here, and then we will end the webinar. The first question over here is, it's related to, how does the continuous compliance program tie to various PCI DSS specific requirements for different frequencies? And that's a good question. So PCI DSS, like most IT regulations out there, have some cadence built in for certain situations. So for example, an easy one is scanning. Scanning has to be done on a quarterly basis, but there are lots of companies that do it on a monthly basis. Certainly firewall rule set reviews have to be done on a semi-annual basis, but there are companies that do it more frequently. So the regulations sometimes are more prescriptive. Certainly PCI DSS does a great job in terms of identifying, what is the, a good time frame, but there are other regulations that keep it, kind of more general purpose. But certainly in the PCI DSS space, there are some recommended frequencies when certain things have to be done, and in fact have to be shown to, to prove compliance from an overall perspective. So thank you for your question. The second one is around continuous compliance, and the question is, how does this tie back to companies who need to satisfy multiple regulations? And that's again a great point, and that's where having building internal dashboards is an important aspect, because a lot of the compliance requirements out there, as you could see from the mapping, are similar across regulations. And so ideally, when you're doing it, you want to ensure that your scope might cover multiple regulations, right? So if you have one environment for PCI, one for HIPAA, one for high trust, one for ISO, when you ask for change tickets, you want to collect those change tickets across the spectrum and make sure you're looking at that entire spectrum, because then you can collect the evidence once, analyze it once, and then apply it to multiple domains and environments in the example I used. But then obviously to do that, you want to make sure you have the right dashboards and the technology to help you do that. Well, that was the time we had. That was the last question that was in there. Certainly feel free to contact us by going to www.controlcase.com in case any other questions come up. Otherwise, you'll get a copy of this slide, video of this recording, or an audio of this recording, and certainly feel free to go to our website for future webinars. I really appreciate the time you have spent today on listening patiently to this, asking great questions, and I look forward to seeing you again on a future webinar with ControlCase. Thank you and have a great day.